Collective. We are a nonprofit art organization in Atlanta. 5 artists make that group up. Myself, Dana Meskey, John Glover, Vando Davis, and Darian West. And this is part of our programming, basically structured to bridge the gap between different generations in art in a particular field, and to just share more about the individual artists, give them a platform to share themselves with everybody, just so everybody knows each other a little bit better, and help close the circle in this strong art community that Atlanta has. So today we have Corrina Sephora, Ellex Swavoni, and Grace Kisa, who will be pulling up shortly. And today's topic is women in mixed media and sculpture. All right, so let's go and give these people a round of applause. So this is our 3rd talk, and so shouts out to us. I'm excited. This will be going on monthly with Emma Darnell, so we have another show coming up, another talk coming up in April 18th. It'll be Latinos in Abstract, and my man Julio will be one of the elders in that conversation. And in May, we will be doing a talk around photography. Jen Alexander will be one of the guests in there. I'm trying to lock in Susan Ross and another young artist, photographer also, Jonathan Brady, if you guys are familiar with him. So again, the conversation is basically, we have some elders on the panel and we have some youth in the panel. We're just kind of sharing dialogue between each other and just helping everybody get to know each other. We'll open the panel up for questions from you all towards the end. So first I'm just going to start off by reading everybody's bio. So first off, we'll go with Corrina Sephora. Is a mixed media artist specializing in metal sculpture, painting, and installation who has lived and worked in Atlanta, Georgia for 24 years. Corrina works with universal and personal themes of loss and transformation within the context of contemporary society. In Corrina's most recent bodies of work, she is exploring lunar images, cells, and the universe as a meditation in the making. In the concurrent body of work, she has delved into the physical transformation of guns, altering their molecular structure into flowers and garden tools through hot forging the materials. Her work has led her to community involvement with conversations of guns in our society. Here's an example of that right there. Corrina earned a BFA in metals and sculpture in Massachusetts, College of the Arts in Boston in 1995. She received her MFA in sculpture in 2005 from Georgia State University and has done residencies throughout the United States and abroad. She works individually and collaboratively, creating a dialogue with personal psychology and social interests, producing art, teaching, and executing public and private commissions. A selection of her awards include Best in Show at Annette Combs Skelton of Mocha, Georgia, Best in Show, first place at the National Outdoor Sculpture Competition and Exhibition in North Charleston. Corrina's work is on permanent display at Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Sites, the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, Atlanta Jewish Academy, and a collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Georgia, and in national private collections, including Elton John. Let's give it up for Corrina Sephora. And Ellex Swavoni, she's an awesome artist. We actually own some of her work. She does some really cool stuff. Ellex was born in 1992 in Louisville, Kentucky, embarked on her artistic journey at the age of 9 when she discovered art toys online. This serendipitous encounter ignited a lifelong passion for sculpture. With resourcefulness and the power of the internet, Swavoni taught herself the art of sculpting and creating toy-like figurative sculptures. She pursued graphic design at Campbellsville University, earning a Bachelor's of Science in 2014. During her studies, she developed an art practice focused on Afrofuturism, depicting women as powerful entities and reimagining ancient ideas through a futuristic lens. Her work often involves the use of computer programs, 3D printing, and fine finishes. In her process, Swavoni creates detailed sketches using computer programs, which are then 3D printed, meticulously programmed and finished with fine paint details. This blend of traditional and digital techniques allows her to craft intricate, futuristic pieces that challenge conventional narratives. With the courage and curiosity within us all and a knowledge of recent and ancient histories, we can transcend standard thoughts and develop new realities for ourselves. Give it up for Ellex Swavoni. Although she's not here, we'll still talk about her right now. Grace Kisa, who should be pulling up shortly, is a Kenyan-American artist based in Atlanta, Georgia. Multimedia artist whose primary expression is sculpture. The process is improvisational, a combination of creative play and problem solving. The materials that she uses vary from clay, metal, wood, fiber, and resin. With the focus on recycling and repurposing ordinary objects, her work draws inspiration from the experiences of childhood spent in Kenya, Ethiopia, Botswana, Virginia, and as a practicing artist in Georgia. By taking what is familiar and transforming it, she creates narratives that engage various histories while working through concepts on intersectional identities, examining the processes of migration and cultural exchange beyond the borders. Particular attention is given to the ideas of comfort, alienation, adaptation, and assimilation, set against how that relates in the global world. Grace graduated from an Art Institute of Atlanta, Georgia, and has worked as a professional artist for over 20 years, exhibiting in solo and group exhibitions across the United States. Notably, in 2024, Grace Kisa is exhibiting with the European Cultural Center in Venice, Italy, in an exhibition titled Personal Structures Beyond Boundaries in the Context of Events Biennial. Grace Kisa, ladies and gentlemen. So while we wait for Grace, I just want you guys to go ahead and just tell us about yourself, tell us about your art career briefly, and help us get to know you a little bit better.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Corrina Sephora, and I'm familiar with some of the faces out here, and then there's some of you I don't believe I've met. So as you mentioned, I moved to Atlanta between 95 and 96 after I finished school in Boston at the Massachusetts College of Art, and it's kind of funny, but I had just started doing blacksmithing, and I was in love with it. I thought, this is the bee's knees, it is just so fun to be able to take up a piece of metal and heat it up and breathe life into it and make it, completely transformed. And so I called up, I used the phone book, and I called up a number of different people who were under blacksmith in the phone book and said, hi, I'm Corrina. I've studied with some blacksmithing and metalwork, and I'm wondering if I could come work with you in your studio. I got a lot of no's, but I did get a couple of yeses, and it is pretty unconventional for women to do this type of metalwork. And I really was raised in a family where it was really acceptable to be whoever you chose to be, and to pave the way in the world as an artist. So that's a little bit of the background. I worked for 2 years. I worked with individual companies, and at one time I worked in a large welding company. I was the first and only woman in the history of the company ever to work there. And I never wanted to do that as a permanent thing, but I wanted to know, what's it like to work in industry, But I will say one thing about metal and spirituality. The piece that's here with the all the flowers are forged out of gun barrels. And a church contacted me a number of years ago, and they said, could we give you this gun, and will you transform it into a garden tool, like a swords into plowshares thing? And I was intrigued. I thought, I'll try that. That sounds interesting. They brought me a pistol, and I was like, I did a little research. I was like, I cannot make anything out of this pistol. We need a barrel. We need a rifle. So they brought me a couple of rifles, and then I made one practice in my studio, a garden tool, and then another there. And then there was some stuff on social media, and then there was the Parkland shooting And there was a lot of public conversation from Iraq vets, from veterans, who wanted to really say, like, hey, civilians don't need to have these heavy-duty machine guns out there, sure, go hunting or whatever with the rifle. So a lot of people were destroying them, and there was an Iraq vet that brought me a gun, and he said, will you transform this into something and destroy it? And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing. And my irises started blooming. And my mom, there were bulbs from my mom, and my mom used to always say, beauty will save the world. So I thought, well, I've made flowers out of metal before. Maybe I can play with this, piece of metal here and do something. So I figured out how to make flowers kind of like that. And they were like, by the way, we're going to bring the news crew, so you're going to be on film while you're doing this experiment. And that's actually the piece that Elton John has. I was in a film with another artist, Joseph Guy. Turns out it's good to collaborate with people because you never know, you share audience with people. And what I'll just refer back to briefly is when I first started doing metalwork, I was in Maine and I met this old blacksmith, white beard, had these feathers hanging outside of his workshop. And I'm like, Doug, tell me about those feathers. I'm 19. And he says, well, I had to set the metal free. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What do you mean? And he says, well, the townspeople donated all this metal to me after they tore down this building. And the building was a town jail from the 1800s. And so if you have a belief, which I do, that there's spirit in the material, then, setting turning that metal into a feather is setting the metal free. And so that's sort of the philosophy. This piece is called Blood of the Earth. There's a really beautiful book called The Bombay Blacksmiths, and it talks a lot about the spirituality of blacksmiths in ancient Africa, and the iron at the bottom, that's iron ore from the goat farm. And so the iron ore was called Blood of the Earth, and there were really beautiful ceremonies, gynecomorphic furnaces, all this to have the metal come from the rocks to be turned into usable metal. A bloom is what it's called. And so also in the spirit of ancient blacksmithing, that's a little bit about how this piece came to be. And then it's got a bird that's similar to a dove that's on the top. So that's just a little bit about that piece. And there's many more things I can tell you about myself as an artist, but I spent a couple of years doing this type of work. And what I do like about it is an avenue of work that is more like socio-political and kind of delves into that spirituality and materiality and history and present. So, thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Ellex Swavoni. I have been in Atlanta since 2016. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky. I am completely self-taught. I learned how to sculpt, how to use the modeling software as I use, all these technologies, 3D scanning, 3D printing, molding, etc. On my own, because there was a void in education where I was from, where our teachers just didn't have the facilities and the skill set to teach sculpture. And so all this time I have been operating in this space of the void, and I'm kind of obsessed with the void. You can see it in my work a lot, where whether the void is indicative of a space where I'm not seeing myself or seeing power or seeing possibility, or a physical void. I'm placing something in that void, or acknowledging that void and what possibilities can exist there, whether it's an entire world, whether it's a powerful figure, etc. And much of my philosophies kind of circle around what we can do, what capacity we can foster within ourselves, what type of ways we can use technology, philosophy, even information we can collect from the past to empower ourselves to create, because it starts with imagination, it starts with the ability to see and ask the questions and then generate responses, and that's how realities are generated. I'm mostly working condition-based right now, so I have a couple public art pieces around. I have one work in Decatur, I have one work on the Beltline in this Trail, and I have Atlantis Rising, it's like a more prominent work. It's been traveling around the city. It's been on Freedom Conduit most recently. And I'm also showing at one contemporary at the moment with Grace Kisa and a few other brilliant artists. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very strong panel of artists who I respect, and I'm looking forward to get to know better. Ellex, since you last had the mic, I'll start with you. Being that you deal with Afrofuturism, I would say, how do you approach reimagining ancient ideas with a futuristic lens? A lot of times it's challenging for us as Black people to see ourselves in the future because a lot of what we view doesn't include us in that future. I remember watching the Jetsons as a child, and there were no Black people in the Jetsons. And it's something you overlook, but it's for a reason, right? But now we're in a place now where you're taking control of that and creating a future where we could be. Obviously, we'll be there regardless, but seeing that first helps, right? So where do you come from with that idea?
I think acknowledging the past is important for cultivating a connection to capacity. So it's like, this is everything that we have done, and so that means that capacity is in the bloodline and the culture and the community, and acknowledging that capacity and acknowledging the innovation that it requires to create community to create a family to a small civilization, so to be able to communicate well, to be able to guide each other, to be able to create tradition, etc., is important. And so that's a foundation for building a reality where you're in a spaceship, because you need cooperation, you need communication, you need culture to bring each other together to build these projects. So that's where a majority of my information towards the ancient comes from. Also, like the materiality, like they're using gold, they're using stone in ways that are mind-blowing. And so just my curiosity about how that material is transformed is interesting as well. But mostly, I go back into the past just to acknowledge that the narrative that is the most recent is not the only narrative. It actually is only a small fragment of all the data that exists within who and what I am. And so that is a primary part of how I kind of build my practice as well. And also acknowledging the correlation between what we do and who we are and the stars. So looking up and expanding beyond the current moment, whether it's acknowledging how small we are in the universe, or even for spirituality or the cosmos, etc. Mathematics and science is also important to what we are and what we do. So all of that is making us look to the work and the acknowledgement of the void.
So yeah, it's the sciences and mathematics and but also the spiritual side you mentioned. So Corrina, you mentioned meditation is important in your process. And so what role does meditation and introspection play in your creative process?
I look at my work, I've heard it said by some artists, which I really am aligned with, is my studio is my temple or my church, or, for me, it's the place that I work things out. A few years ago, my mom passed away. She was a poet. And the last thing she said before she went to sleep on the night of supermoon was, "I'm sending this prayer to you from the moon." And then she went to sleep. And I spent a year really creating artwork about being connected spiritually. And when I say being connected, it's really okay, if you do believe there's some other realm, there's some other space beyond this life that we live in, that we walk on this earth, there's some other world somewhere out there in the universe, like, what is that? So I was really in an inquiry over this whole year, and then it's kind of been since then too, of really being in this space, like, what is the universe? You know, what is the afterlife? What is it to connect to? What is it to connect to the unknown? And I created a series of work called Portals to the Cosmos, and that was really kind of like the beginning of really delving into like this merge of science and spirituality created inside of this space. And I love how you said that about mathematics. I love the whole conversation of sacred geometry, right? That you can create a space that mathematically is aligned in some way spiritually. And throughout history, there's so many spaces where that occurs. And so for me, the act of creating, the act of making, the act of envisioning something and having that come to reality, I'm not going to say it's magic, but it is something that is very powerful. And to be present and to be in that flow. The Dalai Lama actually says that one of the highest forms of meditation is when you lose that time, right? Like whether you're studying science or whether you're reading or whether you're creating art or whatever that practice that it is that is there for you, that you lose yourself inside of that's one of the highest forms of meditation.
Well, hold on. So with that, right, and understanding that power, right, and applying it to artistic medium where hopefully the world can view it and the masses can view it and feel better about it. So where would you say, what do you hope that your work with the guns, where do you hope that conversation leads, right, in turning, morphing a weapon of destruction into something that's peaceful? Where do you hope that conversation leads, right? Because you mentioned that it was like a unity, right, like a challenge, right?
Yeah.
To form and have something.
Yeah.
So where do you hope that goes?
Well, let's see. I guess I'll speak from the experiences that I've had with community in creating that work. So after the work with the gentleman after the Parkland shooting, I got invited to be a part of a project at the Martin Luther King Historic Center with Bernice King and mothers who'd lost their children due to gun violence. And we created a ceremony. We had a gentleman with a furnace where we melted down guns. We have these guns that came from California. They were chopped up. And I got to be a part of this whole, like, facilitating this act of destroying the guns and having the mothers sort of ceremoniously come. I built the basket for them to ceremoniously come and Bernice also to drop the guns into the molten furnace and become molten metal. And then we made shovels and then we planted trees. So if I branch off, and then they asked me to have one of my sculptures as a part of an altar or a shrine. And so if I were to speak about the future, as you're asking, I have to go back to the past for a minute because it's been a minute since I've done that work. But what I would say that I hope I saw in the faces of the mothers and the grandmothers as they created this act of destruction and this act of creation, there's something about letting go. There's something about transformation, and there's something about kind of breaking something down to begin something new. And as far as for the future, it's not kind of hard right now. I'm not really sure. But if I really tell the truth, I have a really dear person who just committed suicide and she used a gun. And it's very present for me right now. do know that there's like something that's available in creating that space of transformation. I've kind of taken a little break from doing that work in the last couple of years because it started to feel really heavy. And you know, I can be a conduit. I can be a space for that transformation. And I did kind of need to step back from it for a little while. So if I go to the space, like what my mother would say, you know, beauty will save the world. You know, there is a space that you can create inside of that transformation, and I think that's what the artist is doing. Yeah.
You guys can hear me pretty good?
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Growing up in Kentucky, I've never been, but I would imagine that
There's nothing to do with grass and.
well, this is my point, right? I don't know the assumption, but like, what you're doing now, right, is, do you consider, because to me it seems like a very abstract thing, like, we're included, it seems like it's very much abstract thing, so when I see what you do, I'm immediately like, where's her head? Like, what is making her think outside of the idea of Afrofuturism, but like, you know, where do you go to pull these ideas together? Because they're so dope. And one of them, the one that you showed me, like the Industry Station, the silver one. This is going to come up on the screen with you, but it's so cool, and every part about it is just so different. Like, it's things that don't exist. It's a very unique abstract expression in figurative form. So where do you pull that kind of inspiration from? Growing up from a place that's pretty plain.
A lot of it comes because there's a void. Because it's so plain, because it's like grass and horses, like really like I walk, you know, not far from my house, and like there's horses behind the things that you can interact with. Like there's cartoons, there's music. There's an entire practice of futurism that exists in media that I was able to like project myself into. But I think most recently, I took a class or audited a class. I was a partner in a class at Georgia Tech. My friend Sean Harris II was the lecturer of that class, and he invited me to audit it, and it was out of his own word. He would be for that. But there I learned design thinking, and I learned that there's a structure to finding opportunity, and oftentimes designers, engineers, etc., for creating products, for creating solutions to things. There's a specific structure for collecting data and distilling that data to find where there may be a void, where there may be an opportunity to solve a problem. And so that's kind of what I was doing as a child, is like, on a subconscious level, like seeing where there was an opportunity for me, or feeling there's an opportunity for me to say something, to do something, to create a solution for something. And then using whatever facilities that I have, whether it's just like the internet, or clay, or pen and paper, whatever, to kind of solve or work through that problem in a visual, artistic kind of way. And that still kind of drives me.
So, I first met you showing the UG Bird at the Future Gallery. Show, I think it was a show, or I think it was an abstract show. Ladies and gentlemen, I was saying, what did you see yourself? Because at that time I was just kind of getting started, right? But what did you see yourself? Was it purposeful trying to be in the fine art lane, or was it something that you just kind of stumbled into, like, it's not going to show my work, or was it a purposeful attempt to dive into this world?
You want the truth, or you want nothing?
I want a lot of that.
The truth is, when I entered the arts community through Future Gallery at Fort Mac in 2017,
18 or 19, I think.
it was 2018. I didn't want to be an artist. I was always going to make art. It was like a part of my being. I always was an artist, but it wasn't my intention to make it my life. I actually intended to start a gallery that was some type of interaction between like the sciences and the arts. So I wanted to learn how to like run a gallery, how to have curation and stuff. But I showed work and I was like successful, so I kept like pouring into the interaction and kept making work, and here I am. I would have not been an artist probably if I didn't come to Atlanta and have that experience. I would always be like, I would still be making work, but I wouldn't be focused on showing it. I would just be making it for myself, and probably more so in the design world, like what my education is for. So yeah.
And shouts out to Eugene Bird for that, because I pretty much have the same reason.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It was like I wasn't trying to do that, but like it was an opportunity to jump in once you're in it. And he had such an environment where it made you comfortable, made you celebrated the emerging artists, and everyone there was kind of done that. So it made you want to just do better. Okay, I can do this.
Yeah, I think that the Atlanta community and all the artist creating spaces are good for creating momentum and building confidence. Yeah, for sure.
So let's pass the mic on to Mr. Kisa. Lots of cool stuff in the city. So go ahead, you've already read the bio, and you've already gotten multiple applause, but go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself from your perspective.
From my perspective, hello everybody.
Hey.
Grace Kisa. Sorry for being late. I'm at Gridlock. 3 spaces had me slow down. But I'm an Atlanta-based artist, originally from Nairobi, Kenya. I came to Atlanta to go to art school at the Art Institute. And once I graduated, I stayed because it was big enough and growing that it could grow at my own pace, small enough that I could feel I could navigate and grow continuously. It was an environment that cultivated artists at the time. We had a mayor in Atlanta that had instituted programs for artists and art collectors, and created a culture of appreciating and collecting art. So when the Atlanta airport was being expanded before the Olympics, they included from the emerging to the master artist in their collective. So that also, amplified, or we felt augmented by that kind of support. We graduated, Maurice and I graduated around the time, like the 90s, when the Black Art movement was moving along. So that also cultivated young collectors to start collecting and being exposed to different kinds of art and artists. We stayed in Atlanta because we felt we could afford to live here and make art as an artist. There are other spaces in the country, like the Mid-Atlantic states, or New York, or Chicago, or California, that are bigger markets, but it's sometimes prohibitive to be able to live there and afford to live there and have a quality of life while you're creating art. So, yes, my name is Grace again. I work in many medium, started out as a painter, photographer, printmaker, and now a sculptor. I've done public artworks with Ellex, my first public art piece with her. Commissioned by the Atlanta Beltline, and a couple of years ago was included in a permanent collection. I have collaborated with Corrina on a couple of proposals for public art pieces. I learned a little bit about metalwork from her, and we're working on a proposal for another project for finalists.
Since we're on, you brought that topic of collaboration, and it's a continuous question within this conversation, because as a crew of artists, one of the things we try to do is exercise the effort of collaboration, right? It's very free form and challenging in so many different ways, and at the end of the day, it improves you, I think, as an artist, because it frees you from just thinking how you want to think. You have the whole team space with the other person
legacy. Amandine and I were a part of a collaborative group that lasted for over 2 years, and then morphed and changed and lasted another, I think, year or so. And we built projects that were bigger than one person could build on their own and more diverse. We built a project that went to New York City, to Brooklyn. We built a project in the first year of the Beltline. And we had a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art Georgia, and worked with a group of underserved youth from the Atlanta Boys and Girls Club, doing printmaking projects and collaborative projects with the community. So I love collaborating. Grace and I both also were a part of the project in Italy, and so there was, although we weren't collaborating on work with each other, we were collaborating on being internationally exhibiting artists from Atlanta, and then came back and had an exhibition at Gallery 72 where we collaborated on creating the space together. And it was really beautiful. There was a third artist too, Saber, who has the pollinator space at the Goat Farm. And so the three of us came together with our ideas, and we had a model of the gallery, and we sort of like talked through, this is what I'm thinking, and took a few notes, and the exhibition was called Beyond the Cosmos. I think you guys said that. Beyond the Cosmos, right? And we found that we had similar strings of thought, similar ideas, and so that was just a beautiful, beautiful exhibition. And then what I really think about collaborating is, I mean, I have this expression, we're stronger together, right? It's like, I have certain skills working with materials, Grace has certain skills with research, and also materials. And I'll just briefly say a tiny bit. We did write a proposal a few years ago for a public art project, and it didn't happen, but I enjoyed the process so much. This other one came across my radar, and I thought, this is really going to be a beautiful space to collaborate. And out of, I don't know how many applicants, they're down to 3 finalists, and Grace and I are one group. So I'm really looking forward to the research that we'll do. And it's sort of a reclamation of space for African American and Indigenous people in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so there'll be some really, amazing research that we'll do about the space. And then I'm really looking forward to the imagery that we create together. And it's kind of like, if you think about like musicians riffing off of each other, it's sort of like that, but in a visual and conceptual space.
As far as collaboration, I have worked, of course, with Maurice Evans on a 10-year photography project that we have worked photographing 40 women in the Atlanta area for an Afrofuturist concept of women warriors and queens. I worked with Fabian Williams on his art battle, where he did some costuming for his character as an art backer. Worked with T. Lang in the dance over there at Spelman. So I costumed 20 of her students for a project for her students, and then her own personal project that she debuted in Augusta and then also at the High Museum. Of course, I collaborated with Ellex on our Beltline project, which was based on the Egyptian goddess Nut, who is kind of an arch over the sky. And as we wanted this piece to represent that, and how we use the stars to mark our way to freedom. One of my special women that I love for that, when it comes to that theme, is Harriet Tubman. I collaborated with Jamal Barber, who's a printmaker, and we combined our sculpture with his printmaking to make a house and an installation. Collaboration for me is an expansion of your ideas. So you may have one way of thinking, but just the pollinating aspect of collaborating together, bringing ideas together. So it's not me to fit my idea or Alex's idea or Corrina's idea, to expand on those notions that we're working toward to create something great. So the best part of the collaboration is the process of creating. And I like the expansive quality of that process.
Grace kind of said everything I was going to say. That's the most that's happening between artists or what is happening for a client, it's always gratifying to know that I can be of service, and that the skill sets that I have cultivated can add value to someone.
Yes, collaboration is important, and you artists out there, emerging artists, find somebody you respect and like, and give it a whirl. Throw some ideas out there. It's a great exercise, and it'll definitely improve your artistry. Grace, I would ask, being that you are live in so many places and have such a multicultural background, how has that upbringing influenced the narratives in your work?
Growing up in Kenya, Ethiopia, Botswana, McLean, Virginia, Toronto, Canada, and Atlanta, Georgia, has made me more adaptable in the first place. So my thinking is more expansive in that it incorporates all those different cultures that I've grown up with, that are environments that I've grown up in, and the people that I have grown up with. So from multicultural cultures on the continent and on this side of the Atlantic, it has made me more adaptable. I'm not so fixed in my ideas, but then I also have a broad range of history to draw from based on experience and the people that I've grown up with. I incorporate that in my work. Corrina was talking about the research. So when I come up with ideas and I'm creating the thing, when I'm creating the story that goes around it, I want it anchored in science, astronomy, history, cosmology, custom, tradition. All those things inform the work and the travel. Even if I'm not living in those places, travel alone just expands your perspective. Just going somewhere else and being around different people, eating different food, expands your experience. So I live in Gwinnett County, which is the most culturally diverse county in the South. So on any given day, I can have African food, I can have Korean food, I can have Thai, and that's a portal into another culture. Even if you don't travel, you can travel within your space among communities, and I take that into the work that I produce.
So with that being said, which piece in your collection, this is a challenging question, but speaks the loudest to that? Like what piece do you think speaks to that well-traveled, well-cultured identity that you have? All of your work kind of does, but what's a favorite of yours that really screams it the loudest?
I don't have a favorite. Because I work in many different mediums, it's like having a favorite language. It's working in different mediums, you speak different languages. You create different meals out of that. I don't have a favorite, but all those things are incorporated in each piece. So to me, all of them speak to my experience growing up, my heritage, my experience where I've come of age, which is Atlanta. I came of age here. So a lot of Atlanta is in my work. The Mid-Atlantic, which is DC, Maryland, Virginia, where I first came when we came to the United States, so I was exposed to cultures from around the world. Museums that were free, and those were our field trips. We could go to any museum, from science to technology to history, and be exposed to all of that. I grew up in Kenya, where it was an international community, so when you look at my nursery school picture, everyone in there is from a different country. And so I've always had a multicultural experience wherever I live, and that has always informed my work. So it's in every piece. There is no favorite piece that says one particular thing.
So I guess you could all kind of touch on this question, but you use a lot of found objects and recycled materials. Let's say you have futurist ideas with mix of old techniques and new technology. How do you navigate, or what? But being that you're all multidisciplinary artists, right? You use multiple mediums. What's like your favorite way to apply old and new techniques? I mean, I know you do it with your sculpture, right? Like you start with a sketch and you put it on paper and then apply it in the computer and then take it further. Or how does your process work using old techniques and new techniques?
I think with both, my found object in the 3D sculpture, I'm trying to minimize the amount of medium that I use, which is why I moved to 3D modeling, because like when I was mold making, I would have to go through 3 different mediums to get a final product. Whereas like if I'm doing something digitally, I guess it's straight, it's one line, and it's like from the computer to the 3D printer, it exists. And the same thing with like, found objects with the glassworks that I've, been making. I go and found the objects, they have MP data in them already from whatever life they've had beyond the point that I've come in contact with them, or whatever memory that I may have with a similar piece. And assembling those things kind of in the store, wherever I find them, and figuring out what could exist. I don't really ever sketch. I never really draw. I let the material kind of tell me what it wants to do. Even when I'm 3D modeling, I'm just like pushing and pulling with like 3D clay and ZBrush until a form emerges. And sometimes I have a loose idea. Maybe there's research that I've collected and I'll put into like an arena channel, and I'll ruminate on that and then let my hands just kind of make something happen.
Great, so question for you. So like when you find materials, and I do the same thing, so I can speak to it too, but it's, how do you like, what is your process for old materials creating something new, right? Like, I love the process, because like you said, Ellex, it's like you find items that already have a life, that already have an entity to them in their own, wherever they came from, but now they're transformed into something completely new in a whole new world that they weren't even thought of being used for. So how do you deal with that process?
So I start by just finding the object, and I choose objects based on the form, not necessarily what they were used for before. So I will adapt it. Part of the process is engineering it in a different way. So I love the form. For example, the base of that piece was a 2-part piece. I took the top off and wove it in to the other, so they're like 3 or 4 metal pieces. I'll lay them next to each other and see if they're talking to me, if they're saying something interesting. I can move them around and try something else, but then I will add the heads and hands. But the initial form has to be interesting enough that I can build up to it. So I'll just find the different objects, I lay them out. Sometimes I transpose different pieces to see something more interesting happening, and then go from there with each piece. I will cast a bunch of heads and hands, and I'll place the heads and hands in it to animate it to see where it's going to go, and go from there. And sometimes that is not even how it ends, because in the middle of working on something, I'll see something else that I had partially created, and it'll inform that. Or if I am making a 3D model, I will sometimes change how initially I was going to use it for, based on what I started with in this piece, and then it will inform the other pieces that I have in process. So there are no sketches. It just starts with the first found piece, and then
Corrina, in your wonderland of metal, I was fortunate to visit your studio, and I was like, wow, this is like so much and so cool, but it's like, you spin in a circle and you're like, I want to go this corner and grab something and do it. It just has that energy of you can go anywhere, pull something and start, right? So what is your process?
Well, I am a sketcher. I have like books and books of sketchbooks, and I really love having sketchbooks because I could be like at the beach with friends and allow ideas to come through. And I generally kind of get on a theme for a little while, and I ride that theme out for days, months, years. There's a few recurring themes: boats, ladders, trees, lunar, cosmos type imagery. And as far as materials go, I love material that has a history. You know, material has a memory, and there are a number of pieces that I've created in my lifetime where I use repurposed material. And I'm just trying to let my mind settle on which one to talk about. But let's see, so, well, my thesis, when I was in graduate school, my thesis was on family, memory, and personal history, and had one big collaborative project with cloth, and had another non-collaborative project with metal. And I chose to use steel barrels, 55-gallon steel drums, and I built a cargo ship that was about 10 feet tall by 8 foot by something, just the prow of a ship coming out of the hull. And so that material was from material that was cargo conceptually, right, or theoretically, ideally. It was cargo vessels for goods, and the ships that were transporting people were cargo vessels. And I'm speaking a little more towards immigration, you know, than other forms of cargo vessel in this. And so it was like cargo that would walk on the ships and then walk back off of the ships. So that was called self-loading cargo, and then created a collaborative project with that, where there were maybe 18 different people that brought their own story, and we sewed that and printed that onto cloth. And so some of the cloth had memory. There was a person her family came from Italy, and they came with sogno d'oro, dreams of gold. And so she used pillowcases for the dreams, but they became coal miners. So that's just a little bit about my thesis in a collaborative project where the material was very significant in the creating. And then I really like using, and that got me onto a whole area of liking to use repurposing old metal, like literally going to the scrapyard and finding metal. I built a big piece that went on the belt line that was old metal shelves that had like blue paint on it. And so there was like, everyone always says, oh, is that stained glass? You know, it's sort of a mysterious color. But it's like painted metal that I then torch cut that then gave a different color, and then I welded it and stitched it together. So I like patchworking and building in terms of the forms, having material that already had some lifetime and then giving it a whole new lifetime. I make boats that are almost like a birch bark boat. So I'll build a hull out of steel, and then I'll take lots of sheet metal and cut it into strips, and then weld that on, almost how you would like a birch bark kind of canoe. So for me, the material sometimes has a history, and then sometimes that material's history is significant in the work, and sometimes it's just there and it's going to serve the purpose. And the last thing I'll say about material and repurposing material, in my practice, I also paint, and so I save the dusks at my studio. So maybe we're cutting a lot of copper. You use the dust too?
The sawdust.
The sawdust, yeah. Rust dust, yeah. So I have all these little cups, and I've trained my studio assistants, if you do a whole bunch of stainless steel, save that dust, because it's kind of silver, right? And we,
Metal metallic.
copper.
You get it at Home Depot, like when they cut the metal, like they have a whole bucket of that stuff.
Yeah.
They'll let you take it.
Yeah.
It looks so good.
Yeah. The coolest desk that I ever had, I built a bell tower in LaGrange. I don't think you use that too. A bell tower in the city of LaGrange, Georgia, and there was a gentleman, they had this old bell that was sitting there, and this young man wanted to have a bell arch tower, something to hang his bell. So I designed and built this three-legged, that you could kind of walk under like a gazebo. But we had to drill out a little piece of this bell from 1832, and I saved that dust. And I use it really sparingly. I'm like, this is the dust from 1832. And then I'll sprinkle it in, so while I'm painting, I'll add some of that dust in, with the metal. So.
You know, as an artist, we learn, we have gains and losses, and so, like, what is an experience, like, what's like the biggest mistake you might have made early in your career that helped greatly in later in your career, like now, like something that's brings in your head, don't do that again, like, you made that,
two. I'll think of two. Yeah, okay. I can think of two losses. I feel like you were sort of struggling around saying the word loss or whatever. Not struggling, but like. So, okay, the two things that come to mind. One was in the world of business, and one was in the world of, I don't even know what you call it. But, so the business one, there's like one time, and one time only in the history of my career that I ever got screwed out of being paid a payment. And I have a contract, as an artist, I'm a business person, and I have a contract, and I abide by contract 99% of the time. And I ask my clients to abide by my contract, and the contract works for both people, right? And so in the clause of the final payments of my contract, it clearly says that either before delivery or upon delivery, the final check is made. And I had this one designer I worked with, and I built this very complicated piece, and they said, oh, we'll have our crew come and help you, so like in the flurry of her crew coming and helping us move this very large cantilever steel bent post that was part of a tree, they decided they didn't like it once it was attached. And it needed this, and it needed that, and could be, even though they wanted a rust finish, then they decided they didn't want a rust finish. So there was this like flurry of debate, and I'm trying to remember, it was many, many years ago, but it was to the tune of about $4,000, right? And there was like, then they refused to like speak to me, and we sat there, and I said, listen, we need to do the final check, and she said, well, we need to do this, this, and this first, but in my contract, it clearly says, final payment upon delivery. And anyway, and so then I looked into small claims court. I hope no one's here from Lawyers for the Arts. I went to Lawyers for the Arts. They wanted to charge me $3,000 to write a bloody letter. So I was just like, no way. So it was just like, finally, I've been doing this yoga cleanse, right? And I'm there, and I'm still pissed off about this, right? And the whole year I'm there, and this yoga lady, she's sitting there, and I brought it up. I said, listen, I'm having a really hard time letting this thing go. And every time I do my bills, I'm like, I have that $4,000, and later. And finally, I got to this point, and I said, I've got to let this thing go. I learned a powerful lesson, which is abide by my contract and have my clients and collectors abide by my contract, and that's it, right? And I never ever have made that mistake again, right? It was really just in the flurry of all of this, right? Okay, so that's one, and I'll tell the other one briefly. So my father passed away a number of years ago, and I made a sculpture to honor my father. And it was a very involved sculpture, and it was called the Majestic Drop Shear. It was you ever learn to ride a bike and your dad was maybe like running along behind you, and then you look back and he'd be there, and I'd be talking to him. We had a long dirt driveway in New Hampshire, by the way. So my dad would be right there behind me, and I'd be like, I'll be able to do it on the next one. He took the training wheels off, and it was like riding down the driveway. And then I was like talking to him, I was like, why is he not answering? And I looked back, and he was all the way like, 100 yards away, waving and smiling. And what I got in that moment was that my dad was not right there with me, but he was there with me. So when my father passed away suddenly when I was 30 of heart failure, I had my first big solo show coming up, and I was building some pieces. I had been building these Buddhist prayer wheel kind of wheels. I was really into kinetic sculpture at the time. And so long story short, I finished this piece 2 hours into my art opening. That's another oopsie. But I did finish this piece a little late, and I was really proud of this piece. It was like, it had this scorpion tail that came up like the sissy bar, and it had double-headed axes for the foot pedals cast in bronze, and a big front wheel and 2 back wheels, and I mean, this thing was so cool. And it was so cool, I wanted to bring it to this cast iron conference. I showed it to all my art friends in Atlanta, but I was going to this iron conference in Alabama at Sloss Furnaces, and I was like, I've got to bring that. And I talked to the gallery director, and I was like, please can I take it out a day early? And they were like, no, and we argued, and I insisted, but I took it out a day early, and I brought it to the conference at Sloss. It was the hit. I mean, everyone, all these old dudes that would cast a whole pickup truck, you know what I mean? They were like, this is cool, Corrina. And I had it at the conference, and I'm so happy I had it at the conference, and then there we were at last day of the conference, I'm out to breakfast with my good friend Julie, and we go pick up the art at the end of the show, and it's gone. It's gone. It's not there at all. So it was not a fully secure environment, you know, but while we were all there for this conference for the whole week, you know, people were everywhere. So, I mean, I figure some young, cool, hip skateboarders or whatever were like, this thing, it's got wheels, you know, and it picked up speed. As we were pedaling, it picked up speed. But I will say, I had really good insurance. I had super good insurance. I had a fine art policy in my insurance. And it was industrial insurance, and so it kind of covered. So I had 25 pages worth of faxes. This is back in the days of faxes, by the way, not even email. And I did get, I asked for $25,000, but I did get $12,000. And I was in graduate school at Georgia State, and I wanted to go to this Maymester in Scotland, but I didn't have the money for that. But all of a sudden, I had this money, and so I always looked at it. My dad loved little insurance money that they finally paid you after you paid them forever and ever. So anyway, those are the two stories that came to mind. So, you know, kind of win, lose, win. There we go.
Majestic traction. Mine is not that complicated. Just customers, like you were talking about. I've had collectors who have collected my money over a period of time where you don't have a contract because you collected my work. Given me a deposit on a painting, delivered it, and got bum checks, and still could not collect on that. Eventually, I had to let it go. But there are times when I see that collector on Instagram posed in front of my work, and his friend posed in front of the work, and it takes all of me not to just to let it, because I let it go. But yeah, I could, but things. Exactly that. So of course you would have a contract, but sometimes when you've had collectors who have collected your work over a period of time, there's a level of trust there. So I didn't expect it. So it does happen.
So when you learn this, you get the trust.
Right. Yes, and deliver, you know, after the payment.
I'm still a little bit like, I'm 32, so there's many things that I haven't encountered. But I think that the craziest thing that I've done that I've like had to coach myself out of is like not taking ridiculous gambles all the time. Because I think as artists that we can get, well, I always make it. I can get into modes when I was younger where I would bet it all, and pray for a return. At Atlantis Rising, I bet it all. I ran up credit cards, and it took me a while to recover from making that work. And it wasn't, you know, the client's fault. It was like I didn't know at what point I was going to have the ability again to make it work. And so I just kind of wanted to bet it all. In the middle of a pandemic, with no studio, no money, and no nothing, to take advantage of this moment. So not gambling everything that I had on an opportunity in the arts to expand on a vision is something that I've had to come to terms with and like make myself more logical about in my art career.
And like I'm a little older, I don't believe, and I did a bet it all on the trip to Italy.
I heard about that.
So I had no idea the amounts. Now I did have a basic idea of what the booth cost, but the shipping was a whole other level. A whole other level. It was more than twice as much as what the booth cost. I felt like I was being gifted because I thought this was. But luckily, exactly. Right, because a lot of the artists that I had talked to before do two-dimensional work, so their shipping charges are going to be completely different from metal sculpture and so later in the game, because I didn't know Corrina was going until they were about to make the announcement. If I had known, we would have been in contact more, you know, would have been able to talk ourselves through it. But it came in crucial when we got our estimate for our shipping. It was So that was a very, and it's not just at the beginning of your career, just along the way, there are always lessons. And so I learned a lot, a whole lot. I felt like this is graduate level work when you're thinking about showing your work overseas and all that goes into that. And if you're an independent artist, what the cost is and who could help you with that cost. So later in the game, I found out about the city of Atlanta helped. There were grants that I applied for. But if I were to do it again, I would go for corporate money because they have deeper pockets and it has a better impact, a bigger impact. So you're not carrying the burden of creating the work, packing the work, shipping the work, and then having the work returned to you.
I'm sorry, Grace, could you repeat who you mentioned?
Say it again?
Could you repeat who you mentioned for that?
You say, who you worship?
Corporate.
Oh, I said corporate.
Oh, thank you.
Corporate funding.
So, hold on, Mike. So, with that, like, what we learn through our mistakes, like, it's important when we're talking to young artists, so a lot of times we don't want them to repeat the mistakes we made, right? So with that being said, like, how do you find the importance of mentorship in your experience? Do you have anybody as a mentor? Do you feel like it's an important process as an elder to give back to young artists and just provide mentorship?
It's definitely important. When we started our career in our 20s, it was very competitive. So a lot of the older artists weren't as generous with the information. Luckily, because of the internet, there's more information out there. But I have had a few older, more experienced artists that have mentored me, that I consider mentors. One of them is photographer Ronnie Phillips. So we would do festivals around the country. He was always good with feedback. Whatever information that you wanted or needed about what's going on, in different states, in California, in Chicago, in DC, in New York. Because he traveled when he shared that information. Phyllis Stevens, who's like my big sister in art, and she's been doing it since 1978. I can always count on her, give her feedback or ask her for feedback on that. As far as critique, I have Maurice, who I live with, he's an artist, and we give each other critique, so I have an in-house thing, but I also have other people, other artists, other curators, other galleries look at your work and give you real critique. And I think you can really get real critique really from another artist.
I don't get everybody's qualified. But it's important.
To be selective about who you get your critique from. Yeah. Everybody isn't qualified to get critique, but hate is good too. I like the word hate. Anyway. But what was the question again?
Well, just mentorship, like, you had a mentor. Do you feel it's important to have mentorship? Do you have anybody you're mentoring currently?
So that's a big question. So I think I entered through apprenticeship at Future Gallery. I then had some mentorship from Maya Baby for like business, navigating the arts and Atlanta. And Grace is my mentor. I reach out to Grace all the time for information. She has all the data, and she's so cool. And I think one of the things that I learned from Grace collaborating with her is like she's so cool. Like I'm a professional at painting. It's especially when I was like in my 20s, straight first navigating public work. But she's very level-headed. She doesn't stay calm. She's solution-oriented. So like I learned how to kind of navigate problems in a level-headed way. And right now I did have a apprentice that I was mentoring named Addie, who I love dearly. She's my little homie. And Shane, who I'm mentoring a little bit now, and we've kind of grown into a little bit of collaborative work on a project now write proposals and kind of navigate finding support for projects and things of that nature and how to organize themselves. And yeah, I think that data information is so important. And so wherever you can get it, if you can get it through positive means, if you can get it through hate, if you can get it through the internet, from books, especially from elders, it's always incredible and valuable information.
And Corrina, I know Corrina also teaches welding and metalwork, so that's an example of somewhat of mentorship. But do you have anybody like known artists who
Yeah, so I can speak to both sides of people who I would look at as mentors, or and people who I mentor, mentees, I think they're called. So, I mean, a big part, I think, is the community you choose to surround yourself with. You know, that's a big, big, big part. And if I think back to, and a lot of times, like, I really like having I'm in a freestanding building for my studio now, but over the years, the last, 30, 40 years, I always had studios in a complex with other people. So years ago, I was over at the Cambersmith Warehouse, which is now called Met. And, I had neighbors, Curtis Patterson, Radcliffe Bailey, a handful of other artists, but they were people that I'd sit down and have a conversation with, like over what is it that you're creating, and how did you make this, and what about that material, and why don't you talk to these people, and, like that. So I think, the people who you surround yourself with is a really big part of creating mentorship. After I left that studio complex, then I was at the Goat Farm Art Center. I was one of the first 100 artists to move in their old new paradigm of space. And so Amadine is here, and we have 6 people. Eleanor Neal's work is up in that part, and Lauren Betty, a handful of people. So since 2018, we've been a critique group, and we used to meet once a month where we'd walk to each other's studios and have cheese and crackers and wine and look at each other's work and give each other constructive criticism. And then over the pandemic, we did it over Zoom, and then now Hopeton Studio is 2 people who were members of our critique group. They have a studio there, and it was Amadine's birthday. So we all meet, we bring some art. So one person hosts, now that we're all in different geographic locations, one person hosts, or, Eleanor and I also now have a studio at the Contemporary as well as my Davis Street, which we're having open studios next Thursday. I hope you guys all come. And so really having neighbors, having a community around you, right? And if you live out far, far away, call us a critique group, and people who you trust, the feedback they're going to give you, people whose art you like, actually, and people have given me feedback that has launched all kinds of ideas, right? Because you're in your brain, sometimes that's a terribly dangerous place to be too much, because you sometimes are your worst critique. And so I really enjoy and value our critique group. We've shown together a couple of times, and we meet once a month, and we really support each other. We go out and we go to each other's exhibitions, and so that's a lot of fun. And then people who I mentor, I kind of have a whole program through my studio where I teach metalwork, and then I have some classes. I have a young girl who's teaching a class right now at the studio named Lyndon Frazier. And she took one welding class from me, and she was a psychology student at Georgia State. And afterwards, she was so enthusiastic. She's like, I'm going to quit school and go to welding school. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm like, well, why would you quit school? Where do you go? Why don't you just change your major? And so I said, listen, I did my master's degree at Georgia State. It's a fabulous school. It's got great, equipment, really wonderful teachers. So she just got accepted. So she started taking classes in sculpture. So she does sculpture and psychology. And I think somewhere in there, some art therapy stuff happens. And so she works with me in my studio a couple days a week. And she also teaches some of the classes that I lead at the studio. And every week, what did you learn? What are you doing now? And then the last thing I'll say about mentorship, about a year ago, I was in an all-women, like 30 women metal sculptors show in New York City, and I was so inspired about, when I first opened my studio, there were maybe 50 women in America that were having full-on metal shops, doing blacksmithing and sculpture, some figure around that. And that was about 30 years ago. And so I really, I teach classes for men and women, but I really do love empowering and creating a space that young women or older women can work with the equipment and learn. And I right now have 3 women that work with me and 1 trans person in the studio. So when I was in that show a year ago, I thought I did a little experiment. I was like, I had one guy that worked with me for 5 years who was just the best, and he moved to New York City. And so then I kept having people come and work with me in the studio, and it was just like the right vibe. And then I just thought, well, what if I did an experiment? I'm gonna do a social experiment in my studio. What if I just have young women that work with me, or not young, but what if I just try that out for a while? So I've been doing that, and it's been kind of fun. It's just a different flavor. And then over the years, I have been a professor at the university, Georgia State University, Savannah College of Art and Design, UGA in Athens, and Spelman College. And so I've had an opportunity, just last night actually at your show, I ran into a young girl that was one of my students years ago. I kind of, at a certain point, was like, I don't know that I'm a university professor. I like a little bit more like the freedom of my own schedule. And I enjoy teaching the classes because it is a space to give to community. It's a space where someone can come in and spend a couple $100 and learn how to make something. Inside of that, I also do like some team building. So we have corporations and companies come. Like my most bizarre team building and special projects group is the U.S. Marshals. We had a whole program until the new administration where they would come once every couple months with a different group. They fly people in, and I teach them, real practical skills, how to weld and how to make things. And then just along the lines of mentorship, because welding is such a technical thing, people a lot of times just buy a welder and they have no idea what to do with it. And it just sits in a box in their garage, right? So I have a lot of people who come to my studio. I have a retired lawyer right now who's been, I was to say, having like memory issues, so he had to retire a little early. And he's like, well, what am I going to do? What am I doing with my life? Why don't I just do stuff I like? So he took one of my classes, and he comes back for, I do private mentorship, so he brings his equipment and I teach him how to use it. But it's a multifaceted welder. And at one time I taught a class called BYOW, Bring Your Own Welder, but sometimes people bring these scary things and find a yard sale. I was afraid about to blow up, so I just do it on a one-to-one basis now. Anyhow, so that's a little bit about mentorship. I was the oldest of 5, and I was always like, okay, we're gonna do a play this day. We're gonna start a rock collection. We're gonna, so it was like, I kind of always was a little bit of like leader of the pack for, like showing people how, I'd learn something and then show people how to do it. So I'm a big fan of being a mentee to other people and mentoring other people. It's a really great way to learn.
It's very important. It's a great give back. And so next I would just say, all of you are pretty experienced and well-traveled in your career. Just talking about the give back, what resources or platforms would you all suggest to any young sculptors who may be in the audience? What would you recommend to help further their career, to help them showcase some of what they're working on as a young sculptor artist?
I think that maker spaces are really important. I think that if you don't currently have a studio, that getting into many of the spaces that exist, there's one in just about every, there's at least 5 that I know. There's Freeside, there's Masquerade, there's, Marietta Makerspace, there's a bunch. And in those spaces, you have the ability to navigate, learning a little bit about welding, depending on the facilities, learning about woodworking, learning about 3D printing, etc. And that was one of the first places that I've had access to the 3D printer. So finding out where your community spaces are and letting yourself kind of learn from and collaborate with those people, and so many projects being ran by artists. There's materials. So find out and patron these spaces. Go to the shows, talk to people, and you'll kind of figure out where you belong and navigate from that position of exposure.
As far as art spaces, there are also art centers that you can go and take courses from. So no matter what county you live in, there are art spaces that offer ceramics classes, woodworking, every kind of sculpture classes, and 2D work as well. And you can start taking those classes for usually a good rate. And most of those spaces also have galleries, so you can show your work there. And then you can also reach out to artists that you see at the exhibitions or on Instagram if they're in your city. A lot of times you can just send out a message and come to their studio and see what's going on.
Well, I'll second both of those areas that both of these wonderful people said, and then I'll add a few. But art centers are really great. This is a great art center right here. There's a whole education program, and Tisha was an amazing art curator. Getting to know people who show art is a really smart thing to do. I remember the day we met at Spelman College, me and you and Ichi met in a parking garage, just chatting it up, and we liked each other, and inviting people to have a studio visit is a really brilliant thing. Sharing your work with people is a really smart move. And making work is the best thing to do, of course. And figuring out what you like to do. And there's a lot of resources, whether it's an art center. Another one that's pretty cool is the Sproul Art Center. And then there's organizations that are national, right? So there's an organization called Mid-South Sculpture Alliance, and I, on and off, belong to that one. I think I belong to it still right now. But they have all kinds of special rates for students at their conferences. So going to conferences is really smart because it's kind of like a whole splayed out, there's a cast iron conference coming up in April in Alabama at Sloss Furnaces. So it depends on what material you want to get into, or it depends on what medium you want to get into. But Mid-South Sculpture Alliance is really great. There's another one called Tri-State Sculpture Alliance, or something like that. But you can look those up on the internet. They're really great resources. And, I'm going to put a little tiny plug in. Going to people's studios is awesome. If people are having open studios, it's a window into a whole world that you may be midway through creating. So April 25th and 26th, myself and a number of people are creating a series of studio tours that will be in the southwest side of town. It's called South of Center Art Experience. There'll be places like the Atlanta Printmaking Studio, Arts Exchange, Black Art in America. My studio will be open, the Murphy Real Studio. Maybe this place we did. Curtis Patterson's studio is going to be open. Adama is going to be a part of it. And it's the first year we're doing it, so we really hope we get a lot of people out. If you want, this is a little long, but I send a newsletter out from my studio. So if you go to CorrinaSephora.com and go to contact and go to the second thing. There's a first thing where you can just send me an email, but there's a second thing that's called submit, I think. And so I send out information directly, and I'm happy to talk to you after this talk about that. So, going to events. Next weekend is the Atlanta Contemporary Open Studios, and I think there's a little cost to that, but it's really amazing. I went for years and years, and I always thought, one day, I want to be so cool as to have a studio here. And I applied many times and got rejected, and then finally I applied, and they said, we rated you the highest of anyone that applied today. So, you see open calls for things, for showing your work, and go for it, And you know what? If you don't get into whatever that show is, somebody, if not a dozen people, have just looked at your work. I met a gentleman who is a MacArthur recipient. MacArthur is a $500,000 Genius Award, and you don't apply for it. They just send you a letter in the mail and a big check. And basically that's to acknowledge that you're a person who's doing great things in the world and you're up to something with your creative self-expression and your practice. So I have a particular attitude about applying for things and submitting my work, which is, of course I get sad when I get a rejection, but it isn't the end of the world. I'm never gonna apply there again. I think, so submitting your work to open calls is great. Starting to share your work. The Carroll Street Cafe is the most approachable and cool hip place that you can hang art in Atlanta that's not a formal gallery, as far as I'm concerned. So there's a lot of places that you can share your work. There's a lot of places that you can, meet other artists. And being in dialogue, having a conversation is a really powerful place to start. And then, physically learning how to do things. The world is your oyster.
So as we approach the end of this talk, I want to end with one question before I open the floor up for questions from the audience. So, in 2025, ladies, what do you have? You've all accomplished some really cool things in your career, and especially you guys on the Italy thing. I'd love to hear more about that whole experience another time. But what do you guys have next on the plate? What's next on the menu?
I mentioned too, next Thursday we have the Open Studios at the Contemporary, and then in April we have the South of Center Arts Experience. And then this Monday I leave for Charleston, South Carolina. I'm going to go install a sculpture and pick up a sculpture from an outdoor sculpture exhibition. Grace and I are taking a road trip. The next couple of weeks are jam-packed, I have to say. And then I'm going to think for a minute after that. But Grace and I are finalists. And what a finalist means is maybe 50 people applied, and then they picked 3. And they're trying to decide between those 3. And so it's your skill, it's your personality, it's all that. So they're going to breakfast and lunch, wine and dine us next week, first week of April. And hopefully we're going to build this piece. We'll have a model that we'll build by June. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So those are the first top things in 2025 that I can say. I have a solo show that's actually the beginning of 2026 at Spalding Nick's Fine Art. And then I just got accepted for a residency at the Vermont Studio Center in Vermont. And I can't think of other things, but I know there's other things that are happening.
The next thing on the calendar for me is a solo show here, May the 2nd. A solo show, it's been a long time since I did a solo show in Atlanta, so I'm excited about that. In the fall, September, I got a fellowship to the Vermont Studio Center, so I'm going to be in Vermont in September.
I have a bunch of contracts that I really can't talk about right now, and things that are in the works proposal-wise. So I'm just gonna say, follow me on Instagram and wait for the releases of those things, because I don't want to make any of my clients upset.
I thought of one other thing. I got a commission from the city of East Point and making a really beautiful sculptural bottle tree that's going to go somewhere in their kind of downtown area. And this commission came out of Grace introduced me to Chris Wayne, who also is big on making murals, if you're a mural artist, all over East Point. So the piece will be finished probably before that, but it'll be completed for the Juneteenth celebration.
So at this time, I'll open the floor. Anybody have a question, raise your hand. Give us your name and ask your question.
My name is Artist Hill Williamson. I'm a sculptor. I sculpt ceramic clay. And I like to bike. And I bike on the belt line. And 2 years ago, when I started sculpture, Grace and Ellex, I almost fell off my bike. It was so unexpected and so stunningly beautiful. I was like, oh my God, what is that? I had to stop. And I was like, this is beautiful. And at the time, there weren't any sculptural installations on that part of the Beltline by Washington Park. And it was just, I love it. And I biked there today, this morning, and I passed by there, and I was smiling because I knew I would see both of you here today, and that made me happy. And so what also made me happier is to know a little bit more about how you guys collaborated and how that came to be on that piece.
We're doing our job here. Anybody else have any questions? I have one for Grace. The piece that shows, it's I think it was like a futurist, Afrofuturist like clothing ensemble, like the woodwork that's like kind of snaking through. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Every time I see it, I'm just like, what is that? This looks so cool. And I believe it's supposed to be worn, right?
So I started by using the bamboo for costuming for a project that I worked with Maurice on called The New Africans. So I created costuming for the warrior and the queen. So a lot of the pieces were armor-like. So the materials that I used were wood that was supposed to be worn, wooden abstract pieces that are worn on the body. And then I adapted it also to be extended into installation. So Lauren Jackson Harris commissioned me to do an installation at the Atlanta Contemporary, one of their sliver spaces. And so I activated that space with snake-like forms that are supposed to be a migrational map, like a travel route. So it snakes in the space as the way conventional and unconventional routes of travel. So people can have a road or a highway that you're supposed to go on and drive on, but then there are routes that humans take that circumvent those traditional, proper routes of how people migrate. And people have always migrated. Humans have migrated since they were humans, since we could stand up and walk. So there's no way a border is going to stop that, or a passport, or a visa, or people are going to migrate. So that's why that navigational route, that's how it came about, using that material in two different ways to articulate two different ideas.
And I believe this next image is the one after this is what we're talking about.
And the show that they're both in at one contemporary, there's people wearing that material.
This work right here.
Yes. So that was the installation at MoCA, where artists curate the show, Georgia artists curate the show for the MoCA, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art of Georgia. And it's an annual or biannual show. So I installed it in a different way there because the walls was more open and was bigger, so I could add more to it.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, her question was about, yes.
I have a question too.
Okay.
I mean, I asked a question, but
You wanted to know more about the process?
yeah, the process of the belt line piece and the name of it too.
All in one. And so it was Samaya who contacted us in 2020. She was working with the Beltline to bring in a collaborative force to activate that space in the Black Trail. And so she's like, you two should work together. We should be in a conversation. And so we got on the call and we had.
And y'all didn't know each other?
We knew of each other.
Okay. Okay.
Eugene had let me know that I needed to be in contact when I first came in contact with him for mentorship. And so we were familiar with each other. We never had, conversed and met each other in real life. And so it was 7 or 10 days? What was it?
It was 7 days.
It was 7 days in the pandemic that we crammed a proposal and we met in a park and we
Shot our two pieces together.
Wow.
we met at a park and shot our pieces together and we finished that proposal and we sent it kind of separately. And then it's supposed to be together and a whole lot of stuff happened. But I don't want to go into too much details about it. It was a hard process. And it took us a little longer than we expected to complete it. We had a road trip to Miami. We had to
part was fabricated here in Atlanta. Her part, which was the head, was fabricated in Miami. Because our budget had been cut in half, we had to find ways to get this thing done. So we rented a car, drove 10 hours to Miami, picked up the head, drove back. You got lost. That's all right. So, you know, we were talking about keeping the cool head. So I had done the first leg. We left it, because I have a system. If I'm driving 10 hours in the morning, I want to leave at 4 a.m. We will get there by noon. Left at 4 a.m. Switched to get gas, drinks, and switched drivers. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, we were coming back to Atlanta to Miami. It's not the end of the world. Because we had turned back, a tornado had passed through, and then we came back. So there was a divine intervention in that. So when we passed through that area, we could see all the trees strewn across the highway. We had just missed it because we had gone in the opposite direction. When we were fabricating the two pieces together, Phil generously gave us space in his.
Phil partnered with us paint and painted in his studio at South River Studios. And it was June, and sometime during that, he was like, "Come on, we gotta get into the other space." And so there was the roof was lifting off of the studio. We had to run into the other building and climb things in order to dodge the tornado. But then, you know, we finished it, it was installed, and it was gorgeous, and it finally submitted its residency on West Side Trail last year, I believe, and acquired a piece.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Grace Kisa, Corrina Sephora, my name is Ellex Swavoni. I'm part of the City Collective, and well, again, we're a nonprofit, and if you would please scan this barcode, it will take you to our website where you guys can donate to our nonprofit and to help fund things like this and the more programming that we have moving forward. So again, give yourself a round of applause. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for everybody out, and Tish and everybody else who makes this possible. We appreciate you all. The next one will be April 18th. We'll be having a conversation with Latinos in the abstract space. May 10th, we'll be having a conversation of April 19th, May 10th. We'll be doing a conversation of photography. We'll be having Jim Alexander's confirmed, and I'm pretty sure Sue Ross will also be involved. So you guys stay tuned to our program. You can follow us on IG, City Art Collective, and just stay aware of what's going on. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.